I'm at the end of my second phase of my life, and you're at pretty much the beginning of your second phase of life. I think that basically life exists in three phases. You start off, phase one is you're dependent on others and you're learning. Phase two is that you're working and others become dependent on you and you're trying to be successful. And then you get later in stage two, and the number one goal that you want more than anything else is to help people be successful without you. Then you can go to stage three, which is, you're sort of free of obligations and so on. And what I did over a period of time, whenever I would encounter a situation and make decisions, I would write down the criteria for making decisions. So my number one objective is to tell you that you need to have your own principles. I'll explain some things, but I'm going to share some of my principles. I hope they're helpful to you. There are things that have worked for me that I've written down over a period of time. But number one, I want to describe this experience to you. Whenever you're in a situation, and if you take the time after that situation and you write down your criteria for making decisions, then you will have that for the next time that thing comes along. And what happens is the same things happen over and over again for the same kind of reasons, but you don't see that. You're operating in a way where, you take them one at a time. And so I would recommend to you that you write those principles down. When you do that, you think about them in a deeper way, and then the people that are in your lives then start to understand how you're behaving, and they can be partners in that idea of meritocratic decision making, so that they can also say, is that the best way to operate and deal with that situation? And so you start to think in a more principled way rather than all of these bits and pieces of different things. So that would be my recommendation. But what I'm going to do is take you through a little bit of my journey, and it's totally correct, as Peter says. I'm really a very ordinary guy who, through trial and error, discovered some things that worked that helped me do what Peter was describing. So what I want to explain is, like, we look at the world, and there are just so many different things to have principles for. Principles are essentially recipes for dealing with situations that happen over and over again. And there's just a million things. You could study, you could be a doctor, you could be a physicist, you could be someone. And the things that I understand and spend time with was economics, investments, and then work. And my approach was largely captured in this slide, which is to say, like, I would go after audacious goals, and then I would succeed and fail, and most importantly, benefited from failure. In other words, you go after your goals, and you then encounter your problems or your failures. And how you're dealing with those problems is one of the most important things. I started to realize, for reasons you'll probably see as we go along, that pain plus reflection equals progress. In other words, that painful situation, if you can diagnose what produced that failure and then develop principles for dealing with it at a different time, in a different way, and then you take those principles and you improve, you learn, you change things, then you improve and you make go on to more audacious goals. And the way I look at life is pretty much like it's this looping process, this evolutionary looping process. That means you go after your audacious goals, you fail, you learn. Failure is an important part of that process. You learn principles, you keep improving. And so I think that I learned that there are only 5 things that you need to do to be successful. If you do these 5 things, you will be successful. And the first is to be clear on what your goals are. You have to know what you're going after. You can't have everything in the world, but you could have almost anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. If you go after your goals and they're clear, you have to know your goals. And along the way, number 2 is you have to identify and not tolerate your problems. A lot of people tolerate problems. And then you have to diagnose those problems to get at the root cause of those problems. And often the root cause is you. Maybe you have weaknesses. Maybe you make mistakes. And with that, or maybe somebody else is making mistakes. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And the power of being able to know our strengths and weaknesses and know how to deal with them is enormous. And only when you know what your problems are and you diagnose that specifically, can you create a design to get around those problems? And that design, very specific design, you go get around the problems, and then if you have a design, you have to be reliable in doing that. And everybody is bad at some of these steps. And the key is to work with other people who are good where you're weak. So I just want to give you a sense of failure. I think probably the greatest problem of mankind, big statement, biggest problem of mankind, the greatest tragedy of mankind is individuals who have in their minds wrong opinions that they're attached to. And they could so easily stress test those to put them out there and find out if they're strong or weak in terms of those opinions, and to move beyond that to make better decisions. And it's a tragedy because it could be so easily dealt with. You can reduce the chances of being wrong by properly stress testing. And I want to take you through an experience just briefly of what happened to me that changed my whole approach to decision making. This was in 1980, 81, and I had analyzed that American banks had lent a lot more money to emerging countries than those countries were going to be able to pay back, and that we were going to have a debt crisis, a big debt crisis. And I thought that that would have a very bad effect on the economy.
Before we continue, help us by smashing that YouTube like button and subscribe now to this channel. This shows the algorithm that you value the information, and it helps us spread this message. Sharing is caring. Please like and subscribe now. Thank you. And now, let's continue.
And that was a very controversial opinion at the time, got attention, and it turned out in August 1982, Mexico defaulted on its debts, and a number of other countries followed. And so that very controversial point of view was right about the debt crisis. And as a result, I got a lot of attention. I was asked to testify to Congress, and I was asked to be on Wall Street Week at the time. And I want to just give you a clip from there.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mitchell, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be able to appear before you in examination with what is going wrong with our economy. The economy is now flat, teetering on the brink of failure.
You were recently quoted in an article. You said, "I can say this with absolute certainty because I know how markets work."
I can say with absolute certainty that if you look at the liquidity base in the corporations and the world as a whole, that there's such a reduced level of liquidity that you can't return to an era of stagflation.
Arrogant? I was incredibly arrogant. I couldn't have been more wrong. That was the exact bottom in the stock market. And we had this decade of success. And it was extremely painful. I lost money for me. I lost money for clients. I lost so much money that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to pay for my family bills. I had to let people go. It was really terrible. But it turned out to be probably one of the best things that happened in my life because it changed my approach to decision making. In other words, it gave me a humility, a fear of being wrong that was to go with my audacity. And it let me stress test my thinking. And so what I wanted, it gave me this notion, how do I know that I'm right? The thing that I learned is being successful has more to do with knowing how to deal with your not knowing than anything you know. And if you can then think, how do I know I'm right? And stress test yourself and find people who disagree with you, the smartest people you can find who disagree with you, and you have thoughtful disagreements so you can take in and stress test. Not only does it provide a lot of learning, but it stress tests your decision, raises your probabilities of being right. And so I have this company, this little company that I'm building, and it changed the way we are operating. And this is sort of what I want to pass along to others who have companies or operating in company about this way of operating. So what I needed was independent thinkers who also had audacious goals, who would go after those together and would challenge my thinking, and we would challenge each other's thinking and try to get to the best answer. And I realized it didn't have to come from me. And so I needed an idea meritocracy, and I'm going to try to explain how that works. And through that idea meritocracy, we have then these principles. By writing down our principles and those shared principles of how we were going to deal with things together, we would have better communications, we would deal with them better. And that produced successes and failures and learnings And the learnings produced happier employees, this idea of meritocratic way of operating, and it produced more independent thinkers and more audacious goals, and it produced the success. And so it was from that learning, from that very painful experience that I went through, that it changed my approach to decision making to create an idea meritocracy. So, what do I mean by an idea meritocracy? I want to be very tangible for you. In order to have an idea meritocracy, meaning, in other words, the best ideas winning out, wherever those ideas come from, you have to do three things. And the first is that you have to put your honest thoughts on the table. Honest thoughts on the table for everybody to see and look at. And one of the problems of most groups of people, most organizations, most individuals, is that they don't want to be honest. And they don't like disagreement. And so, you can go out to a restaurant and somebody says, I like the food. Somebody's not going to be reluctant to say, I don't like the food. Where thoughtful disagreement is the second thing. You have to understand the art of disagreement. Because if there's disagreement, that means somebody's going to be wrong. And how do you know the wrong person isn't you? So you have to understand the art of thoughtful disagreement. And then once you have that disagreement, to raise your probabilities of making better decisions, and that certainly happens if you do it well, then you have to have ways that are going to, idea meritocratic ways of getting past your disagreement. In other words, you have to have protocols, and we do something which we call believability weighting decision making based on different people's credibilities. So that's what I mean by an idea meritocracy. And do you want an idea meritocracy? Do you want to operate that way? Do you want to have thoughtful disagreement, not emotional problems? Curiosity to make yourself more likely to be right. And do you want to abide by protocols that'll help you get past that? So the other thing is, you have to know what people are really like in order to have a meritocracy. And everybody has strengths and weaknesses. So the real question is, do you want to know your weaknesses? Do you want to know each other's weaknesses? Because if you know each other's weaknesses, and you're all going to be better off if you're dealing with that in a forthright way, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, because that's what makes up a great team. So when you know what someone is like, you know what you can expect from them. That's a power. So an idea meritocracy is that kind of organization.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with first-hand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. You will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.